until they can bring up the rest of their skill set. All right. And then this piece, to be honest with you, I wasn't exactly sure about this piece, so when it was asking for what I want to do next, I think I went too broad for it. I definitely had my actionable stuff on the last piece for this project, but I took it as what do you want to do next for a project? Mm-hmm. So I want to change the world. That's why we're all here in this room. So helping kids earn diplomas, you know, they need these, it's not just about the paper, they need the skills of life. These inequities exist everywhere. And I feel very fortunate, as you all who work with me in this program here, that my school and my district are vested in social justice, and that's something that is shared adamantly and frequently, which is awesome. So I currently am trying to build coalitions, and finding those entry points is something that I've been personally working a lot on, and to do this work. And then I do believe that my actions and the actions of the people I work with have made changes. That is it. Thank you very much.
Any questions or comments?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Ready to sit down.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you don't have to move so fast.
I know. It's like I'm done.
I appreciated your student quotations a lot, and the voices of the people in your school community. And also just want to say you kept your cool pretty well while the technology wasn't going great for you, which is a skill in and of itself.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate the student comments. And you know, I kind of wonder what you're doing at school, because whatever you're doing is working, you know, as a whole. What percentage of children, in terms of students rather, that are transported, you know, by parents? And then what's the percentage of those that use public transportation?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Anecdotally, I would say the majority are taking public transportation. Our students, most of them are on free or qualify for free and reduced lunch. And we know who drives because we have a very small parking lot and we're a small school. And I would say the majority are taking public transportation.
Some of your actions and solutions were like really creative and like very feasible to implement, like just connecting more families. You know, you mentioned how a lot of your students cycle in and it takes them a while to build those relationships. So there were tools to set people up for carpools over in that west side of town, and you know, without like a shared Lyft account or something, if two kids wanted to come together. I thought those were really creative and really feasible.
I appreciate every aspect of your presentation, the visuals, the range of data sources, the level of analysis that you did. I just wanted to present a slightly different angle because of my own experience. I just happened to do a similar thing just a few weeks ago for my school. Just compared zip codes to, you know, the students coming in tardy. And oddly enough, the students nearest the school were coming late in the same zip code, and so it raises a question not of you know community barriers like transportation or big roads. It raises a question of student motivation too. So like, why are they coming? Are they just assuming that they will get there on time, so they just get out of bed 5 minutes before school starts and then they end up getting late? So it's just, interesting thing about habits. So the same kind of analysis can lead to a completely different conclusion. Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and there are definitely students, and I only looked at data for kids who got below average grades, right? Because there are a number of students, and I didn't crunch the numbers for this, but it would be an interesting like next step too, is looking at what is happening, what is working for the students who live on the west side of town who are able to get, because anecdotally I have information, but I don't have any like numbers on it. So that would be interesting to see, or to look at the students who are closer to school. Thank you very much. You're not top.
So unlike most presentations, I'm actually going to encourage you to be on your laptop. So I sent all of you a link to a map, yourself included, if you wanted to pull it up on your phone. But
Do you want to look
if you
online?
want, it's a map you can play around with while I'm talking. So I encourage you to be. Aurelia, can I have the other piece?
Oh.
Yeah. All good. I'll walk you through it in a minute, exactly what it looks like and what it is. I'll take that 9 minutes.
9 minutes?
Yeah, sure. While we're at it.
You got the video on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic. My name is Josh Hyman. I'm the assistant principal at James Baldwin Academy, and this is kind of a community mapping investigation here that I did concerning my very unique school. So James Baldwin Academy is a Seneca family of agencies non-public school. This means that we're not private, we're not charter, we sit in this weird intersection of all of our kids are public school kids, but they must be referred to us through an IEP process. We have about 80 kids on site. All of them are designated special education, primarily emotionally disturbed. So super unique context, pretty small school, but we serve an incredibly large area. So yes, the map is all red. This is kind of the extent of where our kids come from. We serve all are part of 5 different counties. 17 different districts and charter networks is where our students come from. And so this led me to a very literal kind of mapping of my community here. Because our kids are coming from all over the place, I wanted to explore some questions around that. Additionally, we serve a very unique population. Like I mentioned, a significant number of school districts. I think there's only 15 there right now, but that's on a rotating basis. Primarily from Oakland Unified, so you'll see the map in a minute. It has a large concentration in Oakland, and then actually a fair number currently in San Leandro, which is where the school is located. Primarily African American, but a fairly mixed set of ethnicities at school, primarily low SES as well. Our grade levels skew a little bit higher, but we do serve 3rd through 12th grade, which another kind of unique factor on campus. A lot of different age ranges running around. And then additionally, most of our kids are qualified under the category of emotional disturbance, number of other health impairments, primarily ADHD, a lot of comorbidity in diagnoses as well. So that sets the stage for a really interesting set of questions. Many of the kids at JBA don't feel kind of anecdotally connected to the JBA community. And so they kind of have these negative feelings, and it has this idea of like, I don't want to be here. This is not a great place to be. I'm checking out already before I even walk in the door, kind of. And my thought about that was most schools exist in a neighborhood. You can more or less walk to school 9 times out of 10, as Megan just showed. We have plenty of exceptions to that rule as well. But for the most part, that's the classic model of public schooling, is you can walk to your school. So the kind of big resource I looked at was transportation. All but one of our students does not live in the neighborhood that JBA is located in. So I have one student in classic walking distance, and there's a nice little green circle on your map that is the walking radius of kind of a typical public school, about a mile, mile and a half, and we have one student who lives there. So I wanted to explore how our lack of a physical neighborhood and kind of the subsequent need for this extensive transportation impacts our sense of community at school, and then what challenges arise from these lengthy bus rides that they go through every morning and afternoon. and then how can we maybe combat that in some ways. And so I reframed that in an actionable way, and I wanted to look at on-site programming outside of school hours. So building more time for them to build community here at JBA. So non-academic programs before, after school, things like that was kind of the actionable space I thought I was gonna move into initially. So I did a data dive in a couple of different ways. Your classic quantitative dive, student information systems, our intranet, gradebooks, roll. We have a wonderful data visualization system. And I plugged it all into Excel, spent a lot of time crunching numbers, but also spent a lot of time talking to people, especially students. As you peruse the map in a little bit, you'll see some of these kids, and I chose some select quotes from some of them, and just my general observations, as well as some other staff and teacher interviews. And then I went very literal. I heard mapping, I heard data, and I couldn't put it out of my head, and so I went and I built a map, and that's what's in front of you guys. So you can play around with it a little bit. It was supposed to be on your iPad, but you got laptops, that'll do. And so I want you to just play around with this. This helps set some context for some of the things I'm going to talk about. And each of these dots is a kid. So you can see we have the Greater Bay Area here. Our yellow dot in the center is James Baldwin Academy, and this is where all of our kids live. We have a kid all the way east Palo Alto, San Francisco, out past Livermore, a pretty wide-ranging area. So just your legend there. You can see there's some walking distance transit stops, so we have a fair amount of that, although all of our students, because of the special ed designation, receive transportation services. And if you click on an individual kid, you'll get a little bit of breakdown of data on them. So I looked at the kids from a number of different angles, a little bit of qualitative. So this is our one student who can walk up the hill if she so chooses. She does not choose to because it's a pretty steep hill. But it gives you a little bit of info on each of these kids. So please click around. There's a lot of really interesting stuff. But I wanted to look at where they were, so how far away, how long it takes them to get to JBA in classic traffic conditions at the time that they're coming, their attendance, their GPA, the number of IRs. IRs are incident reports. These are significant behaviors that we document as a school. And then I wanted to know if they came to back to school night or not, as my one piece of outside of school engagement. That was our first quarter big event. That's our data point for that. So a couple of interesting school-wide averages. Average distance to school is more than 10 miles. Average commute time is almost 25 minutes. And this is in a car or in a bus, so cabs or buses. And so that's for the entire student population, currently 74 students. GPA, attendance, so even for all of this, we've still got an over 80% attendance rate, which is pretty good. An average of 3 IRs per student over the course of the quarter. So I wanted to see if any of this correlated. My initial thinking was saying hey, if it takes you a really long time to get to school, you might miss school more often, because damn, I don't want to go on that bus for that long, right? There's these other kids on there, that seems like too much. And you figure, well, attendance, lack of attendance might lead to a drop in your GPA or something like that. So I started looking for correlations, and I had a really hard time finding them. I went very data number crunchy, and nothing was connecting in a traditional way. So I looked at travel time versus attendance. If you know R squared, that means nothing. There is no correlation whatsoever between that. So kids are still getting to school, or they're not getting to school even though they live close. Their travel time versus number of IRs. It's not, if you take a really long bus ride in the morning, you're not more likely to get into a big incident during the day. Mild, very, 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 very mild, 1% correlation between longer travel time and a higher GPA. Didn't make a ton of sense to me, but this is the best correlation I came up with. Still not super statistically significant, but the higher attendance, you had a slightly higher odds of a GPA. And IRs and GPA didn't correlate, and I was just feeling stuck. And I was like, wait a second, am I doing this all wrong? I'm pretty good with Excel. So I ran another table that was pretty classic, distance versus time. Correlates. So there wasn't something wrong with my data, and it wasn't something wrong in what I was looking at. But it turns out that it tells a bit of a different story. So I went for a second round of data, and I started looking at parents, and I only had a little bit of hard and fast data on parent involvement, and like I said, that was back to school night attendance. And so I found that hey, look, your distance from JBA, the closer you were, the more likely you were to attend back to school night. Okay, well, this is something interesting, right? So same with travel time. There's a little bit of a correlation, so I was like, well, let's make the leap. And, oh, hey, look, so if you did attend back to school night, you actually were likely to have better attendance in general, right? And so I, started thinking, well, oh, there's a slight correlation with GPA as well. Unfortunately, this came pretty late in the cycle, but this is where you go next, right? If the parents can come in and be a part of this, then we can do something. So I was like, whoa, okay, what am I finding here? And it seems like no matter what the trip, travel, our kids show up, right? And that's pretty incredible because a number of these kids have hour-long bus rides. And they're resilient. These kids push through things. The bus ride isn't about to get in the way of them being a part of this educational environment. And so I realized it's not about distance, it's not about travel, it's about the people themselves and the people in their context. And so that led me to kind of my ideas of action. I wanted to bring things onto campus initially, right? I wanted to say, hey, let's make an after-school program, let's get kids to stick around a little bit more. But really, I realized that we need to go to them. The kids are so spread out that you have to go find connections to them in their communities. And so it's not true to think that you can like take this little bubble that's 22 miles away from home and say like, hey, we can help you solve all your problems here, we can help you get all the credits you need, etc. So it's artificial to say you can do that there. And so I shifted the thinking to like, we've got to go to them. And I thought of this in kind of 3 ways. Building after-school programs in their neighborhoods. We have a huge set of resources in staffing. We have 60 staff on campus for roughly 80 kids. We have the flexibility to go to them, leverage things like libraries and parks, shopping, etc. in the community. So bring the after school to them in their neighborhoods, in their pockets. And if you look at the map, you can start to see where some of these pockets might pop up. We want to host more parent events closer to home. So that means you don't get the everybody comes to back to school night or parent-teacher conferences, but you go and meet with 4 or 5 parents at some satellite place. You go to their homes, you go to the restaurant down the street, you meet them on their turf and where they are. And then making home visits a site priority. Right now our therapists are doing a really great job coming into the homes, going to the families. That doesn't extend to the rest of our staff. The rest of our staff don't do that basically at all. So I want to leverage what we're already doing. We already do some really great work. Our therapists are already doing more family work. We have connections to these outside agencies, things like TBS, Therapeutic Behavioral Services, which is a community-based support, ICM, which is connected to the juvenile justice system, also out in the community. We run those through Seneca. We have people. I'm going to take kids out of the context. We go on more and more field trips all the time, things like that. And we recently just started something called a JET program, which is our Jobs Education and Training program, which takes our older students and connects them to community colleges, to jobs, and things like that. And then in terms of a next step, I want to look and see if these things are being effective, right? We're doing these things, we need to do them more and more concentrated, and then see if the efficacy is there. And so thinking about the family, right? Taking a new line of questioning about parent involvement, and being a piece of their community instead of the other way around. So yeah, they're only with us for 6 hours, so let's go to them for the rest of that time in some ways. And so that's where we landed. Yeah, so thoughts, questions, comments? If you play around with the map, there's some pretty choice quotes. And, not everybody is happy with the bus ride.
I really appreciate your recognition of what didn't go so well in your mapping process, which was running all those correlations. I just appreciate your recognition of that and what did end up working well and what you found.
Thanks. Yeah, it was really interesting to say I clearly came in with some preconceived notions that did not remotely bear out, and you pivot. I think that's really real.
I like the map a lot. I'm kind of messing with it. It's really interesting to see all these points,
Yeah.
quotes, and that's really really innovative, so definitely a cool tool and a good way to show, you know, what's going on.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
It really made me look at each of my kids differently, right? Because I could map every single one of my kids, because my school is so small, I like got to look at each of these kids as a series of like collections of data, and that was just like a nice new way to think about them. It's not like Classroom G is doing this, it's like, no, Casey is up to this, you know? This is how he feels about his bus ride.
I thought your recommendations, the after-school programs in the neighborhoods and the satellite events, I thought that was a really, like a really PLI and community mapping kind of recommendation, really like building in all of these things that we've been learning. And the doing a lot, sometimes too much kind of thing that comes with knowing the amount of work that has to be done too. It's just, if you can pull it off, I think it'll be phenomenal.
Yeah, none of them are small recommendations, for sure.
It's okay, sometimes you gotta go big.
Yeah.
I really like that too, of the whole going to and building community in different spaces, because it's still your community, and how can you expand it in a geographical sense? I'm wondering, in the sense of finding entry points, because you know, you are thinking big, which is awesome, and I'm a fan of. I'm wondering if you had a chance at this point in the process, and I know that, you know, you're still working on it, to ask any kids or parents, like, or kind of probe in that sense of what they thought would be good?
Yeah, I haven't yet. I mean, obviously, I think, like I said, the next step is really looking at this parent piece of things and seeing what, so I think, you know, if I were to take a direct next step, it's finding these clusters, and like locational things, and then starting to talk to the people who live very close to those things and what the resources in those communities are and where they like to be already, and then how we can meet them there. You know, one thing that comes to mind is not too far down the hill is Reach. People hear about that all the time. We have a number of kids that go there. It's like, oh, how do you form a partnership or leverage that? Also, that's not accessible to all of our kids. Like our Berkeley kids are not coming all the way down to Reach after school. That's just not happening. But what do you, find those clusters and then talk to people. Haven't done it yet.
Along the same lines of talking about recommendations, I mean, you out of all the presenters here are actually in an administrative role and have the power to choose your first step. What would it be out of all the recommendations that you made?
I mean, I think that like, I think of it in terms of like, what are we already doing to start building family partnerships, and then how do I push that the next step further, right? I wanna be reasonable about these things, like some of these like after school programs in the community, that's a very long-term kind of thing. Our therapists have a very specific focus over the last like 6 months, 6 to 9 months of family engagement and family partnership. We have a family engagement therapist who just meets with families in addition to the kids' individual therapist. So finding ways to connect them, first to teachers. Teachers are who I oversee directly, and so finding ways to make that connection more tangible. So coming with them on home visits and things like that. Because we have an avenue into a lot of these people's lives and their communities already, and so finding a way to take more of our staff and bring them in. So it's not just the therapist exclusive thing, but bringing in teachers and eventually counselors and things like that. And I think part of it is like, well, you can't go to the kid and be a part of their community if you're not aware of it and you're not physically present with it in some way, shape, or form. So that's probably where I'd start, off top of my head. Thanks, yeah.
All right.